mind of a boat builder. You know, a lot of us get into projects and when we start them, we don't think they're going to be that big, but then they turn out to be a lot of work. Well, if you want to see somebody that's in that process, you'll love watching Leo over at Sampson Boat Company. He started rebuilding Tally Ho, and it's going to be a huge rebuild and project. Listen to Leo and let him explain it to you.
Alright, so my name's Leo and I'm 28 years old. I'm a boat builder and a sailor by profession. I started boat building and sailing about 8 years ago, and I started off doing an apprenticeship in boat building and learnt sailing really through the people that I met in the boatyard. And as it was a traditional boatyard, we were building traditional boats, I learnt on those traditional boats. So since then I've been probably working about half and half between building boats and sailing them. I'm from Bristol originally, in the UK, in the southwest of the UK, and Bristol's got a pretty big shipbuilding tradition, but I didn't get into boats until I'd already left home and done a bit of travelling for a couple of years, and then I came back and decided to get into sailing and boat building. So right now I'm in Washington State in the northwest USA on the Olympic Peninsula, and that's where this current project is happening. Who's my hero? Well, that's a hard one. I mean, off the top of my head I'd say maybe Douglas Adams or Billy Connolly. I guess if it had to be to do with boats and sailing and adventuring, Joshua Slocum's probably the one that stands out. And then, you know, I've got heroes in real life, many of whom are friends, but I won't massage their egos by naming them. I guess, I mean, I mentioned a couple of people who are best known for comedy there, as well as Joshua Slocum, who was the first man to sail around the world on his own. I guess I admire people who do things for themselves, think outside the box and outside of what society expects them to do, whatever profession or calling that they're drawn to. People who work hard to make themselves happy and do what they want to do. Well, the boat I'm working on here is called Tally Ho, and she was originally launched in 1910, designed in 1909 by Albert Strange, who has become a fairly well-known British yacht designer, best known for smaller boats and the development of the canoe yawl, which is a small cruising boat designed for British coastal waters. But Tally Ho was one of his largest boats. She was originally launched as Betty, and that's the name she was designed as. So she was built from teak and English oak in the traditional carvel style, plank on frame. And yeah, she's had a long life obviously, and suffered a lot during that. She's had a lot of owners. She's probably best known for winning a famous race in 1927 called the Fastnet Race, which is a treacherous race across the Irish Sea and back. And she won that race in the third year of the race, and it was a year where they had some big storms and not many boats actually finished the race. In fact, only 2 did. So she's a very seaworthy boat. She's not the fastest or the most. She's not really designed as a racing yacht as such. She hasn't got those long overhangs that you'd expect from a Fife or a pedigree Herreshoff or something like that. But she's very, very seaworthy and designed after the British pilot cutters, which are the real British work boats that could take any weather. Later on, she had a lot of different owners, and she travelled a lot, and she was nearly wrecked in the 1960s, and then she was neglected after that, and she had some time where she was used as a commercial fishing boat. So when I got her, she was really just ready to be scrapped, basically, almost just a pile of firewood, but the history and the soul and the shape of the boat was still there, I think. So I've decided to rebuild her, and it's more or less a total rebuild. So there'll be, a few bits left from the original, but not a huge amount. And the goal is really to make the boat seaworthy and make her as good a boat as possible, while retaining the history, the story, and as much of the design is practical. I'm drawn to wooden boats, I think, partly because of the romance really of a wooden boat and the history that often comes with wooden boats. When I decided to become a boat builder, I was travelling around and trying to think of a lifestyle, I guess, where I'd be able to work with wood and still be able to travel. And I was kind of pretty sick of being in trains and hitchhiking and aeroplanes. Not that that's changed, but anyway. The idea came to me of wooden boat building as a way to do something that's sort of deeply connected to our roots as human beings, I suppose, and yet as a practical way of travelling. And since I've really learnt about it, it's become clear to me, at least, that there is something very practical and special about a wooden boat, not only in the romance of the material, but also in the actual practicalities of repairing it. If they're properly maintained, wooden boats can live indefinitely. And the maintenance on a wooden boat is the replacement of planks, the replacement of frames, the replacement of the keel if you need to replace the keel. But they're designed, when they're built in the traditional plank on frame way, so that is quite easy to do. So it's not like a fiberglass boat where if you make a hole in it you've got to patch it, but it's never going to be the same as the original. With a traditional wooden boat, if you do the job properly, and if you're trained to do the job properly, it's actually quite easy to do that. Then she'll be just as good as new. So they really require a different approach, and in our modern society, we lack a lot of the skills and resources to actually maintain wooden boats the way they were supposed to be. But if they are looked after, they can just go on forever and actually get better rather than worse. And they're also kind of timeless. They don't really go out of fashion. A lot of modern boats, if you get a modern boat and then you look at it in 10 years' time, it's going to look dated, but a boat that's already a classic is only ever going to be more fashionable, if anything. The other thing about the material of wood is that it's the only material really which actually wants to be in the water. Salt water is good for wood. It pickles it, it will stop it rotting. So you really don't want to take a wooden boat out of the water, whereas with most other materials, it's the other way around. You really need to take them out of the water to let them dry out if it's fiberglass, or make sure the paint or the coating is really good if it's steel or something else. But salt water is such a harsh element that there's very few things which actually want to be in it, but wood does, and you can see that by looking at driftwood on the beach. It gets stronger, if anything, in seawater if it's looked after. And it's always, whenever you see a wooden boat that is that's damaged, it's always fresh water that's come from rain. So if it's looked after and the decks are kept sealed, you very rarely have that rot issue with wood. Why not buy a boat? Well, good question. I guess the question is really what do you want? What are you aiming for? And I guess at this point in my life, I'm not aiming just to go sailing, because there's obviously very much faster routes to achieve that. Yeah, for me, it's about it's really about the feeling of achievement that you get from building something yourself, and then being able to actually live and use it and travel on it and earn your living from it. When I rebuilt my previous boat, just the feeling of going off on it into the unknown on my own was just, I mean, it was just like nothing else I'd ever experienced. So maybe I'm just chasing that buzz. But and it's not just it's not just that feeling that comes at the end of the project either when you actually launch the boat, but every day overcoming small challenges in much the same way as you would in many lifestyles which are challenging, but overcoming all those technical problems and making something every day is hugely rewarding, I think, and good for the, I hesitate to say soul, but it's good for you, I'm sure, to make things and have little achievements every day which you can actually see. Well, if you buy a boat, chances are it's going to be plastic, white, and pretty boring. We need more interesting boats. We need, I think it's great, for anyone to get out on the water, but it's especially refreshing when you're sailing and you anchor in a bay and you're surrounded by hundreds of production boats. It's very satisfying to see a boat that someone's actually crafted themselves, or whether they've repaired it or built it from scratch, and that's always the boat that I'm drawn to row towards in my dinghy and bring a bottle of rum or whatever. So yeah, I bought the boat a little over a year ago now, but for the first few months at least I was still working on a sailing yacht, so I was kind of coming and going a little bit while I was getting while I was getting a few things set up here. And since then I've been working on it full time, except for the times when I have to go back to England to do some work there to earn money to keep this thing running. Yeah, so I get asked pretty often how long this project's going to take, when the boat's going to get launched. What I usually tell people is that it's going to be 2 years from now, and I've been saying that since I bought the boat, and I'm going to continue to say that whenever I'm asked, for however long it takes. And the plan is, of course, that means eventually I'll be launching the boat 2 years early. Yeah, so I apprenticed at a small boatyard in the UK, and that's not very common. There's a few boatyards that do take on apprentices. I think around the world, really, it's not that common that people are training to be traditional shipwrights. But I trained building Bristol Channel pilot cutters, which are a very traditional working boat of the area that I'm from. Really, in a lot of ways, similar to tally-ho, so that actually was very helpful. And then I went on to work in different boatyards, where we built a variety of different boats, mainly out of wood, but with some other construction materials, but all generally focused on wood. And then, of course, there's my sailing work, which I think helps inform my boat building. I guess knowing what a boat is expected of, or knowing what is expected of a boat on the ocean, helps the sort of stresses and so on it needs to be built to withstand, and certainly the other way around as well. And being a boat builder, I think, helps hugely when you're sailing a boat and you, again, understanding the stresses and the loads. But yeah, it's since I started boat building, I've really enjoyed it, and especially enjoyed doing it for myself in the same way that I've mostly enjoyed sailing for myself. So I've always been drawn to my own projects alongside working for other people. Well, it all depends, really. It's one of those things. I'm determined to launch the boat, to get her finished and launched, and I hope to use the finest materials I can, but it all depends on the funding. So, if I have to nail her together with some ply, I will. Well, maybe not quite. But, I would love, for instance, to cast bronze for all the floor timbers, or the floors and the knees, the sort of brackets which hold the corners of the boat together, basically. But that is pretty expensive, so if that's not possible, then I'll have to use timber. So I think, to put a number on it, it's going to be somewhere between 200 and 500,000 US, I guess, but I have no idea really. That's the other thing I have no idea about. I guess I'm paying for it. I started paying for it at least out of the money that I've earned from the last few years of boat building and sailing. The last couple of jobs I've had have been on pretty large sailing yachts where I was able to save good money and wasn't able to spend much money, which is always helpful. But I certainly didn't really have enough to start the project, even with the amount of work that I thought I had, which was less, of course, than what I now realise I have. So I always knew there was going to be a bit of a push, and I also didn't really know the cost of timber in the US, and I was actually expecting it to be quite a bit cheaper than it was. So, when I took the boat on, I was kind of aiming to rebuild it for 100,000 maybe. Of course that changed, but that was one of the reasons why from the beginning I started making the videos, is I was hoping that, you never know, it might bring some funding in, but I also, my main source of income is boat building work, so I go back to the UK and work for other people from time to time, and again, it depends on how the other funding goes. I've been really lucky to have some amazingly generous people sign up to Patreon and who send me donations, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And so, if that continues and increases, then I'll have to go back and work less often to the UK. But at the end of the day, I'm happy to go back and keep working as often as necessary to keep the project going. I guess I was looking for a project. I think I'm happiest when I'm doing things for myself rather than working for other people. So I had it in my mind that I was looking for a project. I'd had the idea of building a new wooden boat for quite a long time. This one came along, and I guess it was the significance of her history that really attracted me to her. And the size of the boat was around the size, slightly bigger than I was planning to build. And I went to see her, and initially was shocked by how bad she was, and was really leaning towards perhaps not doing it, especially when I started considering the costs of boatyards and workshops and stuff in the US. One huge contributing factor to me taking on the project was meeting the people who live on this property and who have allowed me to live and use their incredible workshop and have the boat on their land. And we have an arrangement, and I hope that it's beneficial to them as well, but I'm certainly getting the better deal, and they're being very generous. So the project really wouldn't have happened without that for a start, because I just wouldn't have been able to afford to put her in a boatyard and rent a workshop and somewhere to live. But I do remember the moment I actually decided to buy the boat and go ahead was I was feeling very a mix of excitement and terror. really, at the idea of, leaving my nice, secure, glamorous job sailing a super yacht around and basically throwing all my money into a rotten pile of wood with absolutely no security. And it was this fantastic feeling of abject fear, really. But it was the moment when I actually recognised that feeling as being the same feeling I had at a couple of other pivotal points in my life that made me make the decision. And that feeling I'd had just before I went travelling on my own, just after I got off school, and just before I went off sailing on my own on my first boat, the trip that took me across the Atlantic. Just before I crossed the Atlantic, really, I had that feeling, and I realised that feeling was something that came with the experiences in my life that absolutely given me the most, and the experiences which really made me who I am. So then I knew it was something I'd have to do, for better or worse. Well, there's a good story behind that. I was actually in Antigua racing, met a guy in a bar who was a filmmaker. He was interested in filming on the boat I was racing on, and I got to chatting about this boat in America that I was looking at, and that was Tally-Ho, of course. And he was saying, "Oh, that would make a great film. You should film that." And I thought, yeah, whatever. But he insisted, and he actually lived in Seattle. So when I flew to Seattle to drive down to see the boat, he came to the airport and he lent me 2 cameras, and he said, "Just take some footage when you go down there. Doesn't matter if you don't use it, but then there'll be some footage of the first time you see the boat, and you never know. You might be glad of it." So I did. I took some footage, and I gave him the cameras back, and he was sort of interested in getting involved, making some films. But in the end, I had the footage, and I was back on board the boat I was working on, and had some time, so I sort of threw a little video together, and that's how it all started. And of course, I had dreams that people would watch it and enjoy it and get involved and stuff, but I never could have possibly imagined the reach it's had. It's been just crazy. So making videos does take up a lot of time. I don't know how long the filming process takes, because it's just something that happens every day, moving cameras around, trying to remember to turn them on and charge your batteries and empty your memory cards and all that stuff. But the bit which I can account for is the editing process, and that usually takes me about 3 days to make a video. I'm probably not the fastest. I've never done any video editing work before this project, but I know I've got a lot faster since I started. But yeah, 3 pretty long days, probably between 30 and 40 hours of editing to go into a video, and then of course the uploading and the putting up the website posts and all the other stuff which comes with it. Yeah, so it can be frustrating at times. Really, the most frustrating thing about it is not so much the time, but just the fact that you have to sit in front of a computer inside for 3 days while the sun's out, and you've got long days where you could be working on the boat, and that just kills me sometimes. But it is worth it. It brings some amazing things, and I don't have a boss, so hey. Well, you guys are my boss, I guess. I use a Canon 80D for most of my shots with a variety of lenses, so that's a DSLR camera. I have a very wide angle lens. I have a sort of medium range lens, and I have the 50mm fixed focal length, which is really good for cinematic shots. And I use a little condenser Rode microphone mounted to that. I use that camera with a couple of different tripods, so Gorilla Pods, which can grip onto things, a regular tripod, and also a electronic gimbal, which keeps the camera steady for handheld shots, which is really useful. Other than that, I use GoPro sometimes, mainly for fixed time lapses. I can leave it somewhere just looking at the boat, and also my phone. And actually my phone has the best slow motion camera, so I use that for that sometimes. But really, you know, as everyone knows, videos can be taken on anything. It's the content and the story which draws people in, and perhaps the editing. I use Adobe Premiere Pro for editing, which is a reasonably good editing software, I think. Well, I hope to sail tally-ho all over the world eventually, but my first concrete destination will be back to the UK, and that will be because that's where she was built, and I'd like to take her back to the harbour where she was first launched and where she was registered. And also I'd love to compete again in the Fastnet race, which she won in 1927. So that race is still going on, and I could enter tally-ho and race. I don't think I'd have much chance of winning this time, because she'd be up against some very modern fast boats, but it would be amazing to compete. And the route to get back home is quite interesting. There's a few different routes. I've not decided anything for sure yet, but I'd quite like to avoid the Panama Canal because, of course, it wasn't actually completed, the Panama Canal, until 1915, so after tally-ho was launched. So I think it would be fitting to find an alternative route. So there's around the Cape, of course, or Northwest Passage, or all the way around the Pacific route. So we'll see. So for me, I think the most difficult parts in a project like this are always those parts where you have to make a difficult decision, especially if it's something that means that you're going to have to spend a lot more time working on it. So for instance, when I had to decide whether to replace my keel, that was a really hard decision, because I really wanted to keep the original keel because of its historical significance, and I didn't want to do the extra work. But I guess I knew eventually that it really was the right thing to do, and as soon as I'd actually made that decision, then everything became a lot easier because I could just get on with it. But it's that indecision and maybe even denial that is hard, sort of psychologically, I suppose. And the other time that happened for me was more recently when I decided that I'd have to loft the boat. That was a pretty tough decision as well, because there was some argument for rebuilding her in the shape that she is, for historical accuracy, I suppose, but I knew that really to loft the boat and rebuild her as a better boat than she is now, you know, as her original lines show her, was the right thing to do. But again, I was in denial about that a bit because, you know, lofting was a whole few weeks of pretty interesting but tedious work. But, you know, interestingly, both of those times I've ended up glad that I've done them, not just because it's made the boat better, but because I've learnt a lot through doing those jobs. Yeah, so I've, you know, been very lucky to receive a lot of help from people all over the world since I started this project. Some of that is just through people I've met here and people I knew already, and then a huge amount through the videos that I make on YouTube. So some people send me donations, and there's people who are signed up to Patreon, which is a website donation platform, basically, so people can regularly donate to something every time a video is released or whatever, that a lot of creators use. So I have some people signed up on that, so I get income in from viewers, and that makes a huge difference to my living costs and material costs. And then people come and volunteer their time as well. So I've had a couple of dozen people at least come through here, and they stay in the workshop and bring their skills from wherever they come from and whatever background they come from. So that's been amazing as well. And now I'm really realising the scope of work that's to be done on this boat, or at least, I was realising that a few months ago, but not when I originally bought it. Anyway, I'm realising that labour, that voluntary labour, is something that this project would really, really struggle without. And hopefully people, they come and hopefully have a good time and learn something from it as well. Right. Well, of course, there'll be thousands every day, and probably the biggest challenges will be things which I haven't even thought of yet. But at this stage, I think, in terms of building the boat, I'm confident, not that I know how to do it all, but that I can find out how to do it or work it out. I guess probably my main concern is more the financial side of it. So probably the challenge will be just raising enough funds to actually do the boat justice and get the materials that she deserves to make it a really authentic and long-lasting rebuild project. Good question. I don't know yet, but I've made a lot of friends through sailing and boat building who I'd trust at the helm of my boat. So I'm sure hopefully some of them will be up for a trip. I'd definitely start over again. I'm pretty much having the time of my life here, I think. Would I do much differently? Probably not that much. Probably try and do it faster. Well, the most basic and important thing to say is probably just go for it. Hopefully that's what everyone says. I guess it is important to have some idea of the scale of the project and some experience to know what you're getting yourself into, because you do see a lot of people who perhaps take on a little too much and get a little overwhelmed, and sometimes those projects grind to a halt. So I'd just say do your research, go to boatyards, visit people who have the same projects, people who live aboard their boats, people who have tried and failed. Find out really what it is you're getting into, and don't let it put it off. Don't let it put you off, but let it inform you into what project is going to be right for you. Because even the smallest boats and the smallest projects can be a huge amount of work, but can be hugely rewarding. And in fact, I can't remember who it was. Someone famous said, "The smaller the boat, the bigger the fun," and they were onto something. I think you could restore a Wayfarer dinghy and have the time of your life camping in it and cruising around some beautiful island somewhere. So it doesn't have to be massive. Start small and work up, but go for it. Well, it varies slightly, of course, depending on what's going on. Usually get up around 7, and I like to do a bit of work before breakfast because I'm not usually quite ready to eat first thing. And then generally just keep working and then go to sleep. But usually crack a beer open at 5, but keep on working after that. Volunteers turn up sometimes, stay in the workshop. We sometimes have people sort of just drop in and say hello, and occasionally drop off some beer, which is always nice. Every 2 weeks, I think my life runs in a sort of 2-week cycle. because I release video every second Saturday, and so the week before that, or especially the few days before that, is spent on the computer, and so I try and make sure I've achieved something within that 2-week space that is actually worthy of making into a film. And then, yeah, usually in the evenings, you know, I guess work kind of winds down on the boat around 6, so as to keep the noise down, but I usually keep on doing something in the workshop, even if it's just pottering around. And Cheka's pretty good at looking after us and cooking up some good food. I wish I could say I did more cooking, but yeah, we've always got some music on. I love working with music, so there's always pretty good variety of loud music going on usually, and then there's sort of dogs and parrots and chickens roaming around, getting in the way, and yeah, we try and keep it pretty casual. I mean, I want things to get done, and you know, that's always the main goal, I guess. You know, we're here to try and rebuild a boat, and progress has got to be made, but you know, we're all here because we want to be, and you know, there's no reason to get too stressed about it. A little bit of stress is sometimes helpful, but we try and not get too stressed.
So if you like woodworking, you'll love watching Leo and his videos, and you'll be able to watch him for years to come. And he needs your support, so be sure and pitch in. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars that need to go into that boat, and there's no reason why all of us pitching in $1 or $2 a month can't do that for him. So be sure and sign up on his Patreon, and if you're a woodworker, go give him a hand. Oh, I almost forgot. You can also buy a challenge coin. This is Tally-Ho's challenge coin. It has Albert Strange on one side and Tally-Ho on the other, and it's something you can keep in your pocket to remind you to try and be as ambitious as Leo is over there. The coin sells for $20, and $15 of that proceeds we send over to Leo at Samson Boat. Thank you.